Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Lighting, and it's the first Monday of the month, and you know what that means. It's time for the next issue of Spawn. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in November of 1992, Spawn number 6 introduces us to the cyborg mafia hitman by the name Overt Kill, who, those of you who have read Spawn in the past, may recognize him as one of the more iconic villains in the Spawn universe, despite the fact that he doesn't appear a ton, which is kind of odd that he would have such a prominent place in the minds of Spawn readers and in reoccurring toy lines that McFarlane released. But he's not around as much as you would assume. It's not like he's, the Joker or the Penguin or something like that. He's there, but not frequently. Story, pencils, and inks, Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor, Tom Orzechowski. Story consultant, Terry Fitzgerald. Color, Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Ali Optics. The story starts out on the Mediterranean island of Sicily, where, as we can see on the very first page, all hell is breaking loose and there are explosions and giant comic book kushker babooms all abound because Overt Kill is on the offensive. Here on the next page, we see Overt Kill stepping out from the rubble of a building that he has just destroyed, because the owners of that building and the business within would not pay protection money to the mob. So they decided to send the most ridiculous, over-the-top message that they could send in Overt Kill to destroy everything that they owned. Overt Kill, of course, is a mafia hitman who is far and away the most powerful tool they have at their disposal. So powerful, in fact, that despite sending the Italian military after him with hundreds of guns and all sorts of tactical gear, they are ill-equipped to face off against this giant cyborg. And he tells them they should try running. I would like to point out, this is a really cool close-up image of his face. I really like the shading that was done here. This looks fantastic. We see that Overt Kill has no trouble whatsoever dispatching with the military. He just charges through them like a raging bull. Bullets can't do anything to him. They just bounce off, and his armor is way too thick for any of the small arms that the Italian military has brought. He is just marching on forward, telling them that they need to get out of his way before he starts to get mad. I'd like to point out here, too, that this is one of the few parts about the look of Overt Kill that I don't really care for, is the fact that he's just wearing chains for absolutely no reason. It's very similar to Pitt in that regard, just that they're there because they look cool, but when you think about it for more than 2 seconds, you realize that it doesn't make any sense to just have, tens of feet of chain wrapped around your wrist and your waist, and you're just carrying around all this extra weight for no reason. We then see on the next page that the Italian military has also brought artillery along in the form of this gigantic cannon, which is known as the Silver God. Unfortunately for them, Overt Kill never gives them the chance to get a shot off. He just jumps down through it and rips it in half in one swipe, destroying the entirety of the tank/artillery cannon, and most likely killing all of the occupants who were operating it. Here on the next page, we see the announcement that Alan Moore will be writing Spawn number 8, so look forward to that in the next 2 months. And on the next page, we see a homeless guy in an alleyway speaking to two of the Italian mafia in New York, and he is basically in the process of selling out Spawn, who the mafia wrongly believes is the one that went around ripping all the hearts out of all of the Dons in New York City, when in actuality, that was the violator. They promise him that they're going to give him a bunch of cocaine if if he tells them where they can find Spawn. He, of course, is happy to hear this and gives up the location of where Spawn tends to hang out. And they, of course, reward him by just killing him instead of giving him any drugs. And I'm not surprised. He probably should have seen that coming. Here on the next page, we are shown that this is not just the first appearance of Overt Kill, but also the first appearance of none other than Tony Twistelli, who is the highest-ranking mafia member in New York City. He's discussing with the two goons that he sent to interrogate the homeless guy, and they're discussing on how they're going to deal with Spawn now that they know where they can find him. I do find it odd, though, that despite Tony being relatively prominently featured in the story that's contained within this issue, his name is never actually spoken throughout the entire book, which is just kind of odd, as he has a reoccurring role in the Spawn mythos. On the next page, we see Spawn in the alleyway being talked to by some of the homeless guys that he hangs around with, and they're just trying to let him know that he doesn't have to just sulk in the corner by himself all the time, that he doesn't need to be afraid of them, which is kind of funny to think about, given who Spawn is, and that, you know, the only thing that they have in this world is each other, so they may as well make the best of that and try to keep each other company. Spawn is actually really humbled by the fact that they're not afraid of him, and they actually, you know, want to provide him some level of comfort, the only level of comfort that they can. And so he begins to tell them a story about someone known as Al Simmons, who, of course, is who Spawn previously was. And we also see here that Spawn's current power level is at 8,092. On the next page, we see that Spawn tells them the story of what happened to Al and what happened to Wanda in the meantime, in that she has moved on with her life and married a new man and now has a daughter that she loves very much, and that, you know, she married Al's best friend, Terry Fitzgerald, and he's really stuck in this dilemma of either living in misery himself or revealing himself to Wanda and really messing up her life and her happiness. But no matter what path he chooses to go down, it's going to result in, you know, one or more people being very upset and not being happy at all. On the next page, we see that we're catching back up with the two mafia goons who have decided to lure Spawn out so that they can take care of him, and their plan for doing this is to essentially just murder every homeless guy they can find in the area that Spawn typically hangs out in, which is a really messed up plan. And I'd like to point out they're also not using any type of suppressor on their guns, so there's just gunshots ringing out in the middle of the night in alleyways in New York, and nobody seems to be calling the police, which, I don't know, maybe that's normal in New York, but I find it odd. And of course, the two of them are just gloating about the fact that they're having fun killing all these guys for no reason, and that they don't seem too worried about the weird costumed guy that killed so many of the Dons that they were answering to. However, we see here on the next page that perhaps they should have been worried about the costumed assailant that they've been chasing after, as he sneaks up upon them, kills one of them instantly, and then interrogates the second one before killing him. Pretty brutally, I'm sure, given Spawn's track record. And now those two have been dealt with, as we see the New York Times. Wow, New York Times, huh? Boy, Todd was just playing fast and loose with using trademarked logos that he did not have the right to use. Alley littered with bodies, two known felons among the corpses. And then we also see that Neil Gaiman will be writing Spawn number 9. Here on the next page, we encounter a somewhat large plot hole in the story of this book as we see the headquarters of Tony Twistelli. He's invited the other Dons of New York City to hold a vote on whether or not they should kill Spawn, which would have made sense had he not already sent out two of his goons to kill Spawn, and those goons failed. He didn't get a vote on sending those guys out to kill Spawn, but now all of a sudden feels like he needs one. But the reason he needs one is because he's actually gone to the trouble of enlisting the aid of Overt Kill, and it will require 2% of their next week's earnings on the criminal market. So, sure, I guess, but still, it just seems odd that he was like, I'm going to kill him, and it's like, well, I guess I'll get a vote this time. We see Overt Kill, of course, does not fit through normal doorways, so he just walks right through and smashes up the place, and then just introduces himself by saying, hi. Overt Kill decides to use the same tactic that the two goons from before used and just murders a random homeless person to get the attention of Spawn. It seems like they probably could have gotten his attention in another way that didn't involve just randomly killing homeless people, but whatever. Spawn tracks Overt Kill to this, I guess, warehouse or possibly some sort of machine shop or whatnot. We see Spawn jump in, land on the floor, stand up. There's large gears here. He tells Overt Kill to come out and face him. Overt Kill, of course, is happy to oblige. Then we see the two of them standing off with each other, trading insults, and Overt Kill makes the first move, grabbing Spawn's cape and slinging him across the building into the machinery. Spawn, of course, is not fazed by this, gets back up, and tells Overt Kill that he's not just some drunken hobo, and that this time he's going to have to deal with someone who can actually fight back. Here on the next pages, we see that Spawn's chains reach out and grab Overt Kill around the neck. He, of course, is immensely strong, and this doesn't slow him down at all. In fact, he actually laughs it off, then grabs Spawn, throws him up against the gearing, and prepares to behead him. However, he didn't grab Spawn, he just grabbed Spawn's cape, which gave Spawn the ability to move out of the way at the last second and crunch Overt Kill's hand in the gearing. So here we see on the next page that the gearing destroys all of the components and crushes the wrist of Overt Kill. Despite his immense strength and durability, he's still not strong enough to weather the crushing power of the gearing. We see here his hand is now just hanging on by a few wires. He quickly rips it off to get it out of his way and continue the fight. Spawn now realizes that he's dealing with a cyborg, which he's apparently dealt with in the past, but this is far more advanced than anything he's ever seen. And he's also quite surprised about the fact that his chains were moving and acting of their own volition, which is something that has never happened to him up until this point. And this is our first instance of kind of foreshadowing that Spawn's costume does have some level of sentience to it. And this becomes a more major theme that's seen going forward in the comic. And we also see here that Dave Sim will be writing Spawn number 10. Overt Kill, of course, wastes no time going back on the offensive and quickly punching Spawn in the face and then dragging him back up by his chains, telling him to get up and fight. I also like that Spawn's cape from the top of the page is flowing down and creating the panel for the lower part of the page. That's a really nice touch. Spawn, of course, though, is not really out of the fight, but is refusing to fight back, which is only infuriating Overt Kill even more as he continues to punch and smash Spawn, telling him to fight, telling him to get up, and Spawn refuses again and again, and then we see Overt Kill finally lose his cool and tell him that if he's not going to fight back, then he can instead just die. Here on the next page, we see that Frank Miller will be writing Spawn number 11. And feeling that he has won the day and killed Spawn, Overt Kill decides to leave. However, Spawn is not dead and is actually quite confused by the fact that Overt Kill doesn't realize it. And he chalks it up to the fact that perhaps his life sensors were damaged when his hand was crushed. And, he was actually just kind of playing possum in a way to figure out what he was up against, try and gauge how powerful Overt Kill was and what it was going to take for him to fight him, and also conserve his energy as he now knows that his powers are limited and that he doesn't want to run out of them lest he fall back into hell and be basically enslaved in the service to Mabalja. He did unfortunately break one of his arms, so he has to use some of his energy to heal that, and later on that night goes sulking into a warehouse in another part of the city where he has some little goodies that he stashed while he was still alive as Al Simmons for just such an occasion as this. And here we see on the last page of the story, Spawn has found the weapons cache that he left as Al Simmons and is proclaiming that no one is going to make him use his powers against his will ever again because he's better than that. This is actually the first instance that we see of Spawn reverting back to the things that he knew and the skills that he had as Al Simmons, going, basically full psyops with all sorts of guns and knives and bullets and stuff. And, despite having so many powers, he's going to try and go at, like he would if he was still a soldier in the army, of just, shock and awe, over the top, suppressing fire, and, full blitzkrieg, if you will. And it's a really cool finishing page. On the next page, we get a speech, or I guess speech/introduction that Frank Miller gave to Jack Kirby on his 75th birthday at the 1992 San Diego Comic-Con, which is a really cool read. If you ever get a chance to pick this book up and read this speech, this is really nice. It was cool to see Frank really kind of like stick it to Marvel Comics about how poorly they had been treating Jack in his later years, and which they had. It was really kind of a travesty, and given the amount of money that he had made for their company, there was really no excuse for them to just kind of treat him like trash, if I'm being quite honest. And, Frank really called him out in this speech and really sang the praises of Jack Kirby when he was giving him this introduction. On the next page, we get Image Info, which is just kind of a little rundown of upcoming books that are going to be coming out from the Image universe and Image Publishing. And then we get this really cool splash page by, I guess it's pronounced Marat, and McFarlane. This looks super cool. We've got Spawn here with his fist all ablaze with fire. He's standing here with the skyline behind him and Mabalja's face above it. It looks really neat. I like this a lot. On the next 2 pages here, we see that it is nothing but wall-to-wall spawning ground. I'm actually really surprised at how many letters Todd published in this issue, because it's not just 2 pages that you see here. The next page is also more spawning ground. That being said, it was interesting to read these letters. A lot of people expressed a lot of tentativeness about the fact that Todd was using Christianity as a basis for the story. Keep in mind, this is 30 years ago, and people were very wary of their religious beliefs being potential fodder for a comic book, even though it would, as the story progresses, it becomes more apparent that Todd, while using Christianity as a basis, doesn't really stick that closely to actual biblical Christianity. It's more or less just kind of like the foundation, and then he kind of fills in the blanks himself and makes up a lot of the mythos on his own without relying too heavily on, actual biblical teachings. But you could tell that a lot of people were not necessarily super on board or okay with that being the basis of this story. We also have one letter that, is very telling of what was going on at this time period, in the fact that he's kind of, the author of the letter is kind of basically upset about the fact that so many image books were just coming out so sporadically. And Todd did a little better than most with Spawn. He would have blank months here and there, but he kept his release schedule pretty regular by comparison to a lot of the other image creators. If you saw my video on Pit number 2, you will realize that it was a solid 5 months between the release of Pit number 1 and Pit number 2. If you'd like to know more about Pit, check out my Pit playlist, by the way. And sadly, that was not an uncommon thing. A lot of these guys that were the founding members of Image were really just dragging ass in terms of releasing books. And unfortunately, in those early days, it kind of made Image the butt of jokes at comic book stores. And it's understandable, because comic book retailers, they make money by selling books. And if books aren't coming out, they're not making money. So they're not really going to be too happy about the fact that these books keep getting delayed. But, Todd, he doesn't really answer for anyone else. He just kind of says, I'm not perfect, but I try my best. And I think he was basically trying to cover for everybody involved that, they were doing their best to get stuff out, but unfortunately they were trying to overcome a lot of hurdles that I don't believe they realized they were going to encounter when they first left Marvel and DC to go form Image Comics. And here on the reverse inside cover, we get the one and only advertisement that appears in this entire book. And that is, of course, for the Dave Sim creation, Cerebus. I don't own any issues of Cerebus, and I've never seen an issue of Cerebus out in the wild. I would like to be able to get my hands on a full run at some point. Unfortunately, I have a sneaking suspicion that that is going to be incredibly expensive, and I'm almost scared to see what the price tag attached to that would look like. And that was Spawn number 6. And despite this being a relatively important issue in Spawn, given that it was the first appearance of both Overt Kill and Tony Twistelli, I like the story and I like the things that it did to advance the character of Spawn. But I gotta be honest, despite his place in the Spawn story and the fact that he is one of the more iconic characters in the Spawn universe, I'm not a huge fan of Overt Kill. And the reason being is because I kind of feel like he almost doesn't really fit very well in the storyline. You got to think, up until this point, if you remove the supernatural elements from the Spawn story, the, angels and demons, the war for Al Simmons' soul, the idea that he's come back from the dead and now has superpowers granted to him from, an archdemon. The rest of the story had been based completely in reality. There was nothing crazy in terms of, unbelievable technologies or, outlandish villains or whatnot. And while it did from time to time mention other characters that were in the Image universe like Youngblood and Savage Dragon, they didn't appear in Spawn. They did exist in the world, but it wasn't part of Spawn's story. Spawn's story involved, murderers and gangs and the military. And it was all in a world that felt very real and very close to our own. And when Overt Kill showed up, it kind of detracted from that because he is this, impossible technological cyborg. And, even in the very first pages of this book, he's fighting the military and they have this crazy giant laser artillery cannon that's beyond the scope of anything that we have in our own world. And I felt like it was just kind of falling into line with a lot of the other comic books from like Marvel or DC that had this impossible over the top kind of feel to them. And it's not something that completely takes over Spawn as a narrative, but it felt weird and it felt a little out of place. But those are just my thoughts. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.